Hi everyone, Jessica Paquette, joined here with trainer Tim Smylie. And Tim, you have some deep roots in the Philadelphia area. Tell me about your family's history here and how you got started training horses.
Yeah, well, my father was a restaurateur here in Northeast Philadelphia years ago after World War II, so he was pretty well known there. And back in the 50s, when they were looking for some action, there weren't casinos and lotteries and whatnot, so the racetrack was where everybody would go. So they'd all pile in the car, go to the local tracks, Garden State, Liberty Bell, what have you, and he fell in love with it and started buying and claiming horses and went over to New Jersey, acquired 700 acres of property, built a farm, which is where I am introduced and grew up. So I grew up around the horses the whole time. Started owning horses when I was out in college. Always went to class, but once in a while I'll sneak out and come to the racetrack to watch my horses run. So that was back in the 80s. I had an older brother, Jack, who trained the horses for me. I had a middle brother, Joe, who rode. So those two were very heavily involved with the horses as my father stayed throughout his whole life. I grew up with it.
And what made you want to take out your trainer's license and make a go of it on your own?
Well, I was in the newspaper business until 1999, always owned horses with, like I said, with my older brother Jack or my brother Joe. So I always was involved with horses and always owned horses. But then when we sold the newspaper, I was not even 40 years old. I'm like, well, I have to do something. I always loved the horses, so I'm like, what the heck? I'll go hang out at the racetrack, get my trainer's license and see how it goes. Of course, I had aspirations of being the next Bob Baffert, but who doesn't? So. But it's been a good ride, and I always said as long as I enjoy it, I'll keep doing it.
And what have horses taught you as a trainer that you weren't expecting just from owning them?
You are unbelievably surprised how many things can happen to them. There's constant change. Is a tough thing, but it's also a dynamic part of the business. It's never a boring day on the racetrack.
Absolutely not. So let's go backwards. Tell me about your first win as a trainer.
When I first started training back in 2000, I claimed a horse from a guy who actually ended up being a friend of mine, Diane Day's husband, Corey Day. And I claimed him, and the first time I ran him back, he won. And I'm like, wow, this is easier than I thought. And he won twice in a row. His name was Boku, I'll never forget. A chestnut horse, and he won his first two starts. It was only probably my first or second start as a trainer, so I really hit the ground running, and I thought it was going to be easy, but it's not always that easy. There's definitely been ups and downs.
So who's your favorite horse that you've trained so far?
Oh, that's tough to say. I have a horse, Mount Surabachi, who is a solid turf horse. He's been a lot of fun. He's Mr. Consistency on the turf, but once I introduce him to the turf, he doesn't want anything to do with the dirt. So it's a very seasonal thing with him. And we claimed a filly a couple years ago named Chelsea Wall. She ended up being one of my all-time highest winners. She was a PA bred. She ran through a lot of her conditions and allowance races. She's a really game filly. Jamie Ness claimed her from me a year or so ago, but she was probably one of my best fillies, one of my best horses.
Now, winter racing in the Northeast can be challenging even under the best circumstances on the days you get here, and it is cold and it is icy. What motivates you and keeps you going?
That's a good question. That's why I always tell people, I'm like, some days these horses just have to be fed and you have to show up. There's days where you're like, what am I doing here? I've had places in Florida that I could spend time, and here I slept out here in the snow and the ice. But it's, the horses are always happy to see you. You need to take care of them. I have good help, but you still have to come and check on them, and you're always hoping that you're going to find that next really good horse. So it motivates you to keep going every day.
And if you could win one major race in the country, which race would it be?
Well, I think everybody would say the Kentucky Derby. I have not been to Kentucky. I haven't even been to Churchill. It's one of those things like a bucket list. Like, I'm not going there until I have a horse to go, but it's getting to the point where I might have to go as a tourist.
Well, hopefully we see you there as a trainer in the winner's circle one day. I'm Jessica Paquette. This is Tim Smylie.